Dependent versus independent clauses. What is the difference between a dependent and independent clause? To sum it up, an independent clause is a sentence and a dependent clause is not. You notice this in the terms. It's a dependent clause because it is depending on something else to finish it, whereas an independent clause flies solo. It's independent.
An independent clause is a group of words that form full thought while containing a subject and a verb. Example, my neighbor doesn't pay his rent on time.
Whereas a dependent clause is a group of words that does not form a full thought, however still contains a subject and a verb. A dependent clause cannot be a sentence. A dependent clause is usually marked by a dependent marker word. Examples, if my neighbor doesn't pay his rent on time. Dependent marker words. A dependent marker word is a word added to the beginning of an independent clause to transform it into a dependent clause. Some dependent marker words are after, although, as if, because, before, even if, even though, if, in order to, since, though, unless, until, whatever, when, wherever, whether, and while.
Here's an example. An independent clause would start out like this. My neighbor doesn't pay his rent on time. By adding a dependent marker word, it would turn into a dependent clause. If my neighbor doesn't pay his rent on time, what would happen?
A term referred to as a subordinating conjunction allows a writer to connect dependent and independent clauses. The product of this action results in something called a complex sentence. This is a sentence containing both a dependent and independent clause. Either clause can come first.
My neighbor gave me an excuse for his rent whenever I ask. Whenever I ask, my neighbor gives me an excuse for his rent. Joining independent clauses. You can connect independent clauses at the beginning of using two different kinds of words. Coordinating conjunctions and independent marker words.
There are 7 coordinating conjunctions that can be used at the beginning of independent clauses to connect them. These include and, but, for, or, nor, so, and yet. When joining two independent clauses, a comma is needed before the coordinating conjunction on the second independent clause. An example would look like this.
My neighbor doesn't pay his rent on time, but he follows all my other rules.
An independent marker word also connects two independent clauses. However, these words can always be in a sentence that can stand alone. Another difference between a coordinating conjunction and an independent marker word is that instead of using a comma, a semicolon is needed before the independent marker word. Independent marker words include also, furthermore, however, nevertheless, and therefore. Here's an example.
My neighbor doesn't pay his rent on time, however, he follows all my other rules.
Good job. A compound sentence is a sentence that has two independent clauses.
A complex sentence is a sentence that has a dependent and an independent clause.